Catford, Denver, by Joe Pearson. 1. A mining town outside Denver, Colorado, a town she never learns the name of. Catford comes a clumsy crab walk, half tumbling down the scattered shingle pathway among the snowy pines. Sweat steams off her and there is panic in her eyes, her lungs all burning as she hits the blacktop road, screams, "Monster, monster!" The 2 or 3 spaced along the countertop, and others in booths in back the diner across the way, look up and out the glass to see her terrified with the mountains and the snow and the night behind her. The candle-lit survivors stare at the frightened girl from southeast London. An inward rush of snow as she pours in, screaming, "Help me, monster!" God has wet knees. God kneels in the caves, wiping blood against the walls. Where does she know that from? It goes round and round her head, that bit, like a song she only knows the chorus of. Perhaps it's from a painting, one of the plaques beneath a painting in the gallery, or maybe it's a dream or vision she can't remember the first instance of. In this same vision she puts her tongue out like it's snowing, but it isn't. It isn't snow, it's ash, and God is kneeling in the caves. She wipes her fob against the reader outside staff reception, and Alberta looks up from her fingernails, splayed newly painted on the counter, to first Catford and then the clock above the one-way glass. "It's late," she says, and Catford nods, "I know," and shivers. "Stocktake," she says. London, a gallery on the river. Behind her, clouds like paint wash past a moon that's almost full. Through the loading bay and up the goods lift to level 5. She comes out back of house. An old couch the staff used on their lunch breaks, the missing back leg replaced with a stack of fashion magazines. Through the double doors to the members' room, the chairs up, lights down, long windows looking over the river and St. Paul's beyond, that almost full and bone-white moon upon its shoulder. The clouds gone past, the stars are clear, but rain still flicks diagonals on the glass. She looks at her reflection for a moment, sketched and imprecise, touches her fingertips to the window just to test herself. Every day there were less lights in the city. Every day the sky scrubbed that much clearer of pollution. If their numbers had dwindled to almost nothing, then the black sky would look down once more on a planet lost of people. Stocktake? Yeah, why not? She counts the booze in the cage out back, then heads upstairs to enter the numbers. 3 of the 5 computers don't work, and those that do are connected, far as she can tell, to some looped internal server that don't go nowhere. Emails don't work, there's no internet, or there's no way she can access it, which is practically the same. She never really understood it to begin with, and now most of that has gone, and leaves behind a stillness, what was always there, like the tactile silence left behind when a noise you've got accustomed to stops happening. She generates a variance report, even though no one will read it, prints it out, logs off, and sits here for a moment. A diary on the desk she spends all day losing, then finding again. She flicks through it, but it don't go back not nearly far enough to precede all this. It goes back as far as diaries do, and gives her, as she flicks it quick, the unexplored impression as of time malleable and looped, recurring, and that makes her think as well that she don't know with any certainty what the date is, and what if the agreement what held that to be true is void now, obsolete. She turns gently left-right in the office chair, just sits here for a bit, then goes through her drawers and eats a tin of halved peaches with her fingers, resting in the quietness of it all. What happens then when all this goes, she wonders? What happens then when the peaches and the petrol all runs out? I won't be here, she thinks. I'll be long gone, she thinks, and thinks no further. She does a round. Wynand, feet up in control with a bank of monitors before him. She taps the glass in the door and he raises a hand, drops his big feet and turns round in the swivel chair. His beard is neatly trimmed, his white shirt ironed perfect. "Evening, girl," he says. "Wynand," she says, pleased to say his name, the warmth of it, 'cause she likes him. He's a kind man, decent, Everyone is fucked and always were, but nonetheless he's decent, and surely that's all when it counts, when no one's watching and there's no future left to judge you for it. And yet now's also when it makes no difference. She leans with her foot against the wall, a bit sullen. So it comes and goes, sighing, hopelessness, knowing good or bad don't make no difference anymore, like saying, I'll show you, to people who don't even know you're there. So what's happening, she goes. Usual shenanigans, he says, and nods to one side, maybe at the monitors to be ironic about the stillness of the images, or maybe he's nodding towards the radio. The flat of her one soul against the wall, she listens while he rocks back in his seat facing her, puts his big clean hands behind his head, the fingers interlaced. The BBC World Service still runs a few broadcasts, and a woman with a cut-glass English accent talks through developments in Europe's land war, territory lost, retaken, a mass grave exposed by children on a border. Who is fighting whom at whose behest, so much less clear, now the territory that was in dispute has lost all meaning, for there's no one much left to define its borders. No one owns nothing no more. Well, perhaps it all holds the same. It loses all meaning, and yet somehow also stays the same. It's the same, she thinks, and nothing's changed. Thinking about a war in such a context makes her brain hurt, and yet leaders, or the leaders' people, carry on a hollow cause, and like the weather, the war rolls on. See you then, she says. The lift takes her back to zero, and she watches the numbers change, then the doors slide open and she's in the turbine hall. Birds high on the girders, plushly fluttering an echo around the space. Everything is like this at 1 a.m, careful and interesting, touched by something, which is why what? Why else you come here in the night? It's because you can't sleep, you have these visions. Nightmares is what they are. You feel insecure and afraid, and so you iron a clean shirt and come to work all hours, day or night. Yes, that's partly why. It's partly because the freedom of her days feels loose like dust in her cupped hands, and she don't know where to put it, just watches it run out. In the day she often looks across the hall to the long desk that side, the perspex screen along it and a bank of useless monitors, a swivel chair by each. She thinks, is my love working today? And if he is, her heartbeat goes erratic, her limbs feel strange, and she can hardly contemplate the agonizing walk across the hall to thread through the complicated slalom of tensor barriers set up to collapse and manage a queue they haven't had for months. So instead, she would just walk past with empty knees and raise a hand. Maybe he'd see her, maybe he wouldn't. Maybe he'd see and pretend he doesn't. Is my love working today? The tanks are mostly empty, de-installed save a genie half extended, a pile of thick ropes on the ground. The fragment of mirror stuck halfway up the wall glints an unplaceable reflection of a light she can't identify. In the no-sleep middle of the night, the truth is, Catford is all the old certainties, and with them old realities break down so that everything is possible. For example, you could levitate, you could float across the turbine hall, and in the early hours she believes this, believes when it's night and the gallery is empty that she could float across the hall if she decided to, and so she's not surprised when that's what happens. She is floating, flying. As she's coming out below, the cubicle next door opens out and Alejandra steps into the corridor. She puts a hand over her chest. "Me asustaste," she says. They go up to level 9, to the restaurant, what's been closed since the first lockdown. Catford looks around behind the counter. A few bottles of Coca-Cola rattle in the drawer. She pops the caps of 2 with her lighter and takes them to the counter, where already Ale is sitting on a high stool looking at the city, what's mostly dark in this direction south. "What you doing here?" says Ale. "Did you come to work so early?" "No," says Catford, "I came because sometimes in the early hours I go out into the city." Alejandra looks at her with wide eyes, shocked and frightened. "It's dangerous," she says. "Dangerous why?" says Catford, and thinks the girl will tell her all about the Met Police picking stragglers off the streets and doing who knows what to them. For she too has heard of bodies gagged and beaten on the roadsides, and yet, yes, when the rain abates, gilded by the art, or by this vision, or by a wish to end it all, or some contiguity of the three. But it ain't this that Alejandra warns her of. Instead, she says, "The fish-eye man." "The fish-eye man," says Catford, but neither looking at each other. Instead, still out the windows, at the city south, all dark and lost in night. "The fish-eye man," goes Alejandra, "is the boss. He has this, what you say, this magia." And she shapes her hands, rolls one above the other, then swaps them round as though she's holding some sphere or orb. "This magia," she says, "it tells the truth. He's police and has this thing. It shows the future." "Shows the future," says Catford, and stops herself from saying what future, because it's not just a glib rejoinder. It brings almost into focus some nightmare dream or vision she keeps having. She puts her tongue out in this dream. She's in the mountains, but it ain't snow what lands on her tongue, it's ash. And God, I don't know that I believe that, says Catford. "It's dangerous," Alice says again. They're quiet for a time, then Catford says, "Do you live here now?" And Alejandra nods. "I've got to get my mother over here," she says. "I need to work and save the money." None of them have been paid for some time now. You could just... But she don't say that neither. She don't say, "Why not just go out, Alejandra, and help yourself to money? There's money everywhere. It don't mean nothing now. It won't buy you a flight. There are no flights. Your mother is not coming to London, and you are not going to Bolivia. The circles, what you circumscribe, are the circles in which you live now, and never any more beyond that, except by foot, and except at exceptionable risk. The truth is, when she leaves here in the middle of the night, it's like she leaves herself behind. She is tempting something, tempting fate, okay, playing with the dangers as though to force fate's hand and finally show her what these dreams have been about. Buenas noches, Alejandra." She heads out into the city.